Hi, it's Michael. Welcome to the channel where we figure stuff out together because we're all in this together, especially for this video. Um, I'm 60 years old and you learn some things along the way. And I'm going to save you some time. And at least I wish somebody would have saved me some time and let me know these secrets. But there's one main secret. And bear with me on this. It might take a few minutes to get through it. But it starts about 30 years ago. My oldest daughter, we got her a book. I think it was called Chicken Soup for the Soul, with these little inspirational stories. I used to read to her every night and talk to her every night about life. And I was a young father too, and I was kind of learning at the same time. But there was this one story that struck me. And it was about this little girl on the beach. And the tide would go out, and all these starfish were stranded on the shore. Thousands of starfish as far as you can see. And this little girl didn't know what to do, just so many starfish, and she'd pick one starfish up and throw it back into the water to save that one, and pick up another starfish and throw that in the water. And this person came by and said, "What are you doing? There's thousands of starfish. You can't save everybody. You can't save all these starfish." And she picks up another starfish and throws it in, and she goes, "Well, I saved that one." And that meant something to me. I didn't quite know what it was, because you go through life and parenthood and life in general, and it gets complicated. You want things to be a certain way and they're not. And life is frustrating and you can't figure people out, and people are disappointing, and the things you wanted don't happen, and people hit walls. Everybody does. We all go through it. And as you get older, it doesn't get any easier, but you start to figure some shit out. So I had that story in the back of my head, and maybe 15 years later, I'm watching an infomercial. So this is when infomercials were still a thing. And it was an infomercial for St. Jude Children's Hospital. And for 20 minutes, I watched these stories about these kids. You know, you think you have problems, and then you watch about a child at St. Jude who the hospital itself is based on St. Jude, which is the saint of lost hope. And we've all had lost hope. But when it comes to the physical lost hope, and especially a child, it's overwhelming to watch. It was for me. And I couldn't sleep after it, watching it. I knew of St. Jude, but I never really, you're busy with your life. So the next day I called up the number, and they said, I said, "I want to help." And they said, "Oh, yeah, you could donate." I said, No, I want to do more. They said, "Well, we're doing this event. It's called the Game Day Give Back." It was wrapped around the Super Bowl, where you throw a Super Bowl party and you raise money, and all that money obviously goes to St. Jude. I said, "Okay, I'll do that. I'll figure that out. What's the most anybody raised last year?" She had to look it up. She goes, "Well, about $10,000. I said, "Okay, I'll beat that." I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to do it. I'm not an outgoing person, but I said I was so passionate after seeing the infomercial and thinking about it. So I came home. I told my wife, and my daughter was now an older woman. She was older. My son was older. I said, "Listen, as a family, we're going to do this. We're going to raise money for St. Jude." And we all went out. And I've already at that point kind of limited my people exposure, instinctively. But this forced me to put myself back out to humanity. Everybody who I crossed paths with, the UPS guy, "Hey, we're doing a St. Jude event. Will you come do the St. Jude event?" If I'm at the hygienist, I'm like, "Can you do the St. Jude event? Come to my trip." Everything was a conversation. It opened me up to everybody around me. And not asking for help, but telling them about this, hoping they'd have the same feeling about it as I did. And all these people came. Friends, strangers, they brought food, they paid the money, we had a fun time, and a miracle happened. We raised more money than anybody in the United States. We raised like $13,000. And it was immensely satisfying and exciting. And I thought that was the end of the story. But a few weeks later, we received a box in the mail, and it had St. Jude shirts, which we all still love to wear. And it had a note, and it said, let us know when you're coming down to the hospital. And I'm like, wow, I don't know if I want to. I want to raise money and I want to help everybody, but I don't want to be at the hospital and have to see these kids in pain and what they're going through. But we decided to go. And me, my wife, my daughter, and my son. And you walk up to St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis. At least I did. And I thought I was going to have the worst day of my life. And when you're in there, you realize it's the best day of your life. You get to meet the doctors who dedicate their lives to helping these kids in need. They moved to Memphis to do it. You meet the nurses who are saints in themselves. And then you see the families and you talk to them, and they're thankful and hopeful. But most important, you see the children, and they're sick. And you, just like you see, they have the heads shaved, and they're wheeled around in these little wagons because they don't use wheelchairs there. And everything about the place is for them to smile, to give them hope when there's no hope. And you walk out, and you, at least for me, I was reinvigorated in my faith in humanity. I mean, think about how much I got from that. Whatever I gave my time, I got back 100-fold, and that's the secret. The secret is find your St. Jude, find your charity, make your circle small. You can't fix everybody. You can't save all those starfish. And if you think you can, you're going to be frustrated. But I realized for me with St. Jude, I was able to just kind of put my head down and say, I'm going to do this thing. And I stayed with it. We've been with St. Jude for 15 years, and we still raise money for them. And I'm on a committee that we do a party every year, and it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'll continue to do it. I'll never say no, because at the end of the day, I get back so much more than I give. And there's so many people out there that, you could do this in your neighborhood. My wife volunteers at a senior home, and sometimes it's just your time. Sometimes it's just talking to people, making somebody's day. But there's charities out there, and there's people out there who need your help and your time. And what it does is makes you realize that you're valuable. Sometimes people forget that. The world can beat you down and beat that out of you, and you take enough no's and enough rejection in life, and you start to think you don't have that value, but you do. Make yourself valuable to people, and whatever you give, like I said, you'll get back tenfold, and you'll save some starfish, and that's a pretty good feeling. That's it. Talk to you soon.